Well, good morning, Chris.
Good morning.
Good morning. A very, very warm welcome. I've actually been really looking forward to this. I have to say, I really do enjoy this. And not because I think I'm putting you under any pressure or anything else like that. It's because I just enjoy talking to people.
Yeah.
And you've got such an interesting background. I mean, you only need to flag up a couple of things in conversation. First of all, as a seafarer, it always appears to be quite kind of romantic, although I see it as quite hard work at times. Okay, so tell me, Chris, the seafarer, where did that all start, Chris?
It started, I went through junior school not really knowing what it is I wanted to be. And then I got to senior school.
I wanted to be Superman, but go on, carry on.
Well, my mother remarried when I was about 14.
Okay.
And she married a chap who worked in the offices of the Union Castle Mail Steamship Company.
Okay.
And he had a regular supply of company magazines containing pictures of ships going all over the world, and it captured my imagination. And eventually I said to him, look, do you think this could be a career for me? And he said, yes. And he seized upon it because one of the perks of working for the Union Castle Line is you could offload your offspring onto the seafaring staff. So I was marched into Union Castle head offices and put before Captain Big Jim Culpin, who interviewed me for a potential seagoing career and accepted me. I was then packed off to...
So you were 14 at this stage?
I was 60, 15 by then when I had the interview. Okay. At 16, I went off to nautical college.
Okay.
And spent a year in London at a nautical college where you learn all about navigation, on how to build ships and meteorology and how to row an old boat around the Royal Docks in London. And eventually then you, after a year at nautical college, you go to sea.
Okay.
And
so I'm just trying to imagine going back. Here you are, not really quite sure what's going to happen. And then you're coping with your mum, who is now in a different relationship, and you've effectively got a different bloke in the house, okay, to cope with. And you're about 14, a very impressionable kind of age, and an awful lot's going on. So have you got brothers or sisters, or are you...
I have one natural full brother.
Okay.
And I have one half-sister who I didn't know about at that time. My father had actually left us when I was about 4 years of age, so I didn't really know him. But when my mother remarried, my stepfather, he had 3 children of his own, who, strangely enough, I knew before my mother ever knew my stepfather, because we were all at school and in the Scouts together and everything like that. So it was 2 families coming together, and it was all very amicable. And I'm still in contact with my stepbrothers and sisters today. I mean, this is,
I mean, very fortunate, because those things can blow up and can become very upsetting and very disruptive, can't they? So your memories are nothing but positive in that particular stage.
Yes. I mean, I didn't run away to sea because of that. I went to sea because I wanted to go to sea. I wanted to see the world.
So what was Chris like as a kid at school? What were you like at school?
I've always been a highly intelligent person. It may sound a bit vain to say so, but I am. I have a very high IQ. And one of the teachers at school once described me as a boy with a Rolls-Royce brain who's pottering along like an Austin 7. And school didn't interest me. It held nothing for me. I didn't need to study. I could pass exams without doing any studying whatsoever. I just knew the stuff. But when I got to nautical, I remember my reports from school were appalling. I remember my last English report from my English master said, his efforts for me have been nothing short of insulting. Now, I have to say the teacher was disciplined for writing that report. But nonetheless, when I got to nautical college, the reports were the exact opposite. At last, I was learning something that I didn't know about. It captured my imagination, and I wanted to learn about it.
So talk to me as an ex-teacher, because I'm interested to understand what was going wrong in the equation of Chris in school and the school experience. What was going wrong?
Too many teachers, too many children, not enough teachers. Okay. I was born in 1946, which was the height of the bulge, and we were, 30, 40 to a class. So nobody got any individual tuition. No teacher could take individual interest in you.
So you never felt associated or any relationship whatsoever?
Not with the teachers.
So you can't think of any teacher But you can think of teachers you dislike, but not particularly teachers who you like.
I can think of one or two that I liked, and by coincidence, they always taught mathematics, and that was always a subject that interests me. But the other subjects, no, not particularly.
Okay. It's interesting, actually, isn't it? If you look at that formative and those formative years, how it makes such a huge impression and drives people's behaviour in terms of what they do later in their lives.
I mean, I've found I'm now very interested in geography and world politics and things like that, but that's not formed out of education. That's formed out of, well, education, if you like, but learning while I was at sea, visiting various countries. This is back in the 1960s, long before international travel was the norm for people. Very few people had travelled anywhere at all, but there was I travelling the world and meeting people, from all different parts of the world, and that was the greatest education I could ever have had.
Okay, so it was quite insular at that particular time. I'm just trying to imagine that particular time. People never went abroad on holiday. They actually didn't have the romance of television or seeing foreign holidays or stuff like that. So it's very, very insular by comparison, wasn't it?
Yeah, very.
In fact, most people, and most of your generation, would have never been on an aeroplane, let alone a boat, or gone to sea.
No, I hadn't. I'd never been on even when I went to sea, I'd never been on an aeroplane.
Right. So it was all new and innovative.
Yeah.
So, Chris, if you can, and I'm not suggesting that your memory is anyway fading, but if you can drag it back to those first few weeks, talk me through what actually happened in those first few weeks.
Strangely enough, I do give a series of talks to people like the WI on my time at sea, and it is entitled "Before I Forget." So it's an
let's do it now,
appropriate
then, so you don't forget.
Get it on tape quickly. I first went after nautical college. I went to sea with another company that was part of the Union Castle Line consortium called South American Saint Line, which was a small fleet of ships trading between the UK, Europe, and South America. And my mother took me down to the Royal Docks in London. It was September the 9th, 1963, and she put me on board a ship called the St. John, which was bound, first of all, for Europe to load with cargo, bound for South America. And then we went down the coast of Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, discharging everything in Buenos Aires, reloading grain, corned beef, and all the produce of Argentina to bring back to Europe and the United Kingdom. My first few weeks at sea were taken up with, I was a cadet on board the ship. And as a cadet, you're meant to be a junior officer. Well, not really. You're there to learn how to be a seafarer. And as a motto, really, if it moves, you salute it. And if it doesn't move, you either wash it or you paint it. And I learnt really how to be a seaman. And you spend your time doing what all the normal deck crew would do. So doing the mooring ropes, rigging derricks, doing all that dirty stuff. Yet in the evening, having to dress up like a little officer and gentleman and sit in the officer's saloon and learning how to hold the knife and fork, because there were passengers on those ships. And so it was a strange dichotomy of existence on those ships. For 1 minute you were part of the crew, and next minute you were trying to be a little officer.
Okay. Was it frightening at times? I mean, because it was a big challenge in terms of lifestyle.
No, never frightening. It was always, you always had a bit of apprehension about it, but never frightening. Sometimes the weather could be, in a bad storm at sea, then it could be a bit disconcerting. But I don't ever remember being frightened.
Okay, right. So your memories of actually your first experience for the very first year are nothing but warm and good.
I'll temper that with saying first trip to sea, which lasted 3 months, I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I was homesick as hell, and I just wanted to get back. When we got back to the United Kingdom, the ship only spent about 3 days in London, and I was sent home for 2 days leave, and then straight back on the same ship again, and off I went. And this carried on for about 2 years on the same ship, and I was never homesick again. I just wanted that 2-day break to go back and just decompress or whatever it is.
Base.
Yeah, touch base. And after that, I was never homesick again. Couldn't wait to get back to sea. Loved it.
Okay. So I'm just imagine, because the isolation or the being on your own and feeling homesick comes at night or in your quiet time when you're on your own.
Yeah.
And actually, it's a horrible feeling, isn't it? I mean, I can relate to that and understand exactly how that feels.
Yeah, you're very busy most of the time. You're either busy working or you're busy being social. But it is those quiet times in your cabin or in your bunk that you do get homesick.
Were you sharing with other people?
I shared with one other cadet in the bunk. Yeah, well, in the bunk, but in the cabin. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Was that easy for you or difficult?
It depends who you're sharing with. I must admit, the first trip to sea was with a cadet I didn't particularly get on with, but subsequent voyages, he left after one voyage. He couldn't hack being at sea at all. And on subsequent voyages, I sailed with, shared cabins with different cadets, and we got on great. And it was no problem, never a problem again.
Okay. And I think actually that being away from home and having to look after yourself and manage everything is quite a big challenge, isn't it?
You haven't got your mother there to pick up and do your laundry for you. You haven't got your mother to fold your socks up and put them away in the cupboard. You have to do it yourself. And even today, if my children come home and visit me at home and they leave stuff lying around, the old seafarer in me kicks in and I have to pick things up and I have to tidy things away.
Does that make you a bit of a neat freak?
A little bit. My wife is a very clean and tidy person, but she's always leaving cupboard doors open. Now, at sea, on a ship that moves around, you never leave cupboard doors open because they can bang. And at any time of the ship, any time of day and night at sea, people are asleep because people keep watches during the night. So I'm very conscious of that. I don't ever mention it to her unless she sees this podcast, but she will leave drawers.
You mean that message might trickle through?
It might trickle through, yes.
Okay, because we've all got things that trigger us about all sorts of circumstances. It's interesting because my dad was a seafarer in the war. He went off to the Middle East and actually he got there by a really kind of crazy route because he wasn't actually called up because he was in an essential occupation in and around Exeter.
Yeah.
So he went off to be he was a mechanical engineer, so he went off to look after the engines and so forth on what was a boat or a ship which was full of fuel, like a floating bomb.
Yeah, tanker, yeah.
I mean, it was full and actually used to refuel all sorts of stuff all over it, but it had a crew which was predominantly Chinese, and he got on incredibly well and absolutely loved it. And it sowed the seeds of what became a pattern for him in his life because he subsequently went off and actually got a job in Hong Kong. And so I spent time as a kid in Hong Kong because of that experience. And he had a Scottish captain who was the shop, and he was the captain of the ship, and himself, and they were the only two Europeans on the entire ship. So the seafaring kind of bit I get, excuse me, and I also get that people's behaviours and the things that they learn and the rituals and the routines become part of who they are. And it used to bug my dad tremendously that I wouldn't do things sequentially and necessarily in order.
I know how he feels.
Yeah.
I know how he feels. If ever myself and my family are going on a long trip in the car, I have to stow the luggage in the boot of the car because I know I can stow things in such a way that no matter how the car moves, that luggage is going nowhere. It'll stay in one place. And it's the same with stacking dishwashers. It has to be done in a certain way. So,
I now know where that obsessive behaviour came from. It's ingrained in all those years.
You're learning as a seafarer that you don't want things moving about that shouldn't be moving about.
Okay. So you talked and you alluded to the fact that it's okay, but sometimes in the middle of a storm, it can be pretty scary.
Mm-hmm.
And is that because it's just being battered about all over the place, or because there's so much to do, or?
I think you get weary of it. Part of the Newcastle group that I was with were little ships that belonged to the Bowater Paper Company, and they were about a fraction of the size of normal cargo ships. And you were put on those Bowater ships as part of your training. And I did go on a couple of those ships. I was on one ship called Constance Bowater and another one called the Alice Bowater. And they were little ships, about 4,000 ton, that used to carry newsprint and logs and anything to do with the paper industry. And we would sail across the North Atlantic empty to go out to Nova Scotia and Newfoundland.
And you'd be battered.
And load. You absolutely battered. The ships were very underpowered. They would do in calm weather, the best part of 12 knots, and that was it. But in bad weather, and traditionally when you're sailing towards America, you're going west into the weather that's coming at you. On some days when you worked out where you were at noon, you could still see behind you where you were at noon the previous day. And it was just this relentless battering. It wasn't frightening as such as you thought you were going to sink. It was just monotonous, and as much as you couldn't sleep, you couldn't eat, it was just, it was just chaos all the time.
Okay, so you have to imagine it's like being in the middle of a washing machine.
Yeah, very much.
And I can imagine that becomes relentless and just wears you down and constant and continuous.
Yeah.
So you're a junior, you're very, very much down at the bottom of the pecking order. And I would imagine you don't get all the best jobs because you're in that position. Because does the rank determine how good the job's going to be, or what you have to do, or what your duties are?
Well, as a cadet, as a first trip cadet, you are somewhat junior to the ship's cat.
Okay.
And anything if anybody requires tea made or anything like that, it's the junior cadets that do it. Once you're no longer a first trip cadet, and even though you've only been at sea for 3-4 months at this point, another chap has come on board who is a first trip cadet, and suddenly
You've climbed.
You've climbed. It's only one rung, but that first rung of the ladder is probably the most important one you make on your whole seagoing career until eventually you step into command. That one after the first trip, that's the biggest step until you get to be.
So I'm trying to imagine now, and I'm trying to imagine this young Chris who is at school, which he doesn't like and doesn't really enjoy and doesn't really get engaged in, but is clearly quite bright and quite capable, and therefore I'm trying to rationalise that with why and what was it about going to sea that actually filled the things that school hadn't provided before. What was it? What was the ingredient about being at sea?
I think it was probably, as I said, it was about seeing all my stepfather's publications and all his stories about the ships that he's, that made a big impression on me. That gave me the reason to want to do it. The actual motivation to take the plunge and go to nautical college was more out of the fact that by the time I reached the end of the fifth form in senior school, what was in front of you after you'd taken your O-levels, which for those of a certain age are things that we used to do back in the old days, rather than GCSEs. You took your O-levels, and then you were faced with the possibility of carrying on for another 2 years at the same school doing your A-levels. And I thought, sod that. I'm not doing another 2 years at something which I don't particularly enjoy. And going to nautical college gave me that ideal way out, if you like. It gave me the opportunity to go and study something I wanted to learn about in a totally different environment, and also being shoulder to shoulder with people of the same mindset as myself.
Okay, so at school, or the school environment just didn't attract you at all?
I no longer wanted to be part of it. It was, and I haven't in my mind overanalyzed it over the years, but looking back on it, I mean, I was perfectly popular at school. I had plenty of friends and everything else, and took part in everything. But the academic side of it just wasn't for me. I knew there was better ways of learning it, and that was going out in the world and experiencing it. And I didn't want to become an accountant or forgive me for saying, but a schoolmaster. I didn't want the normal shore job. The thought of just sitting in an office for the next 50 years didn't appeal at all.
People would now refer to that as kind of experiential learning anyway, which is what people do when they're doing apprenticeships, or they actually learn on the job and learn by what they're actually doing. Because you learn about life in that process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and I think you learn a lot about yourself, which you don't necessarily pick up in school, because you're at home in the protection of a home, and your mum, as you rightly point out, is kind of folding your socks and putting all your clothes away and looking after things and cooking meals, and you don't have any personal responsibility at that stage. And suddenly you're now in a completely different experience altogether. If you're honest to yourself, what do you think in those first few months, because there's quite things that we can learn in terms of transferring that into education today. What do you think your biggest learnings were about being at sea in those first few months when you go back? What did you learn most?
I think you're suddenly, although you're still in many ways a boy, was only 17 by this time, you suddenly have to become a man. You're totally in a man's world at that point, and you have to be self-reliant. It's not to overstrain the metaphor, it's sink or swim, frankly. I didn't find it difficult, but I know a lot of people going to sea on their first trips, they didn't last beyond before the first trip because they couldn't integrate in a totally male environment as it was then. I mean, now there are plenty of ladies that go to sea, but in those days it was a totally male environment.
Was it very macho?
Surprisingly not. I mean, you'd think it would be, but it isn't, because it's the concept of, I like to call it the concept of shipmates, that you're there to support each other, even though you may be several ranks higher than someone, or someone may be very subordinate to you, or a lot more experienced than you. You are all together in the same endeavour. You're on this lump of steel that is 500 foot long and 60 foot wide, and you're sailing around the world on it. And if you don't get on together, and if you don't help each other out, then the ship it's more a team effort than anything else I've ever experienced in my life.
Okay, so you become dependent upon your existence, your whole status, by all of your teammates or mateship. I mean, you really do live mateship.
Yeah, and if you can't manage something, if you can't do something, then there's always someone who'll tell you how to do it. Never make the same mistake twice. Everyone will forgive you for making the same mistake once, but don't do it again. That's it.
Okay, I mean, it's a hard learning, isn't it?
I suppose it is, looking back on it, but having experienced it myself, no, it wasn't. You just do it. You just
so
get on
would your
and do
belief be that there must inherently be this strength of discipline, process, and procedure behind what it is that people do?
There has to be. I mean, I look at I have 3 children, and 2 of my children have gone into the same sort of service type environment. My son is in the police force, and one of my daughters is in the Royal Air Force. And if they'd have gone into those professions at the age I did, 16 effectively, I would have thought, how on earth are they going to cope? How are they going to cope? But if I draw on my own experience, I know they bloody well would have done, because you just get on there and you do it.
Okay. But in terms of that, you were only living in their shoes, weren't you? And nobody could have grown up in your shoes or understood what that was like. It must have been transformational. The Chris who was at school, who really was not connected with what was going on, not that you didn't have friends and so forth, but you just weren't connected in terms of what this learning cycle was all about. And actually what actually happened was process and procedure and discipline of route and routine of doing things.
And 3 months after coming back to the UK and seeing my friends again, albeit for only 2 days, I knew stuff they could only dream about.
Okay.
I'd had experiences they could only dream about.
Can I then ask you, at a young age, did that make you judgmental about other people's kind of sloppiness or lack of attention to that sort of detail? Does it build
Probably
an intolerance?
yes, because I am. I am somewhat intolerant of untidiness or sloppiness. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think your kids would say at this juncture? Would they cite examples of things that they think you're obsessive about?
I'm sure. Again, I haven't thought about it, but I bet they bloody well would.
Like what?
Oh, I don't like to see a job being half done. And it has to be done properly, and it has to be done. It has to be done completely. And I look at my children as they grew up, making the same mistakes at school and in their academic studies, the same mistakes as I did. And strange enough, out of my 3 children, and my 3 children are triplets, so they're all roughly the same age, and one of them was very bright academically, and the other 2 were equally bright, but rather like me, didn't apply themselves so much at school. And strange enough, they're the 2 that had gone into a service environment. And until today, this is the first time this has dawned on me, that they needed that sort of disciplined environment to suddenly flourish, and both of them have. Whereas the other girl, which was far more academic, she's gone into more academic pursuits, using her skill with the English language to make a living and cut her way in life.
There are ups and downs in both kind of assets.
Oh, yeah.
If you've got discipline and you've got organisation and so forth, that's great. But it can mean sometimes, if you're not careful, that you can be quite judgmental about other people or intolerant of the little mistakes that they may make.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, it may sound silly, and I look back and I can look at behaviours from me where I can look at school and think to myself, I actually have been so influenced by those things in my life. So we had to line up 3 times a day for every single meal and have our hands looked at, our hair had to be tidy, and our shoes had to be polished. And I look at men now when I go to meetings who arrive with scruffy-looking shoes, and I can't help but notice that they've got scruffy shoes. Can you think of little things that you do in terms of your behaviours because of the things that you grew up with as a result of going to sea so young?
I find now, because I spent my time, I spent 20 years at sea, or very nearly 20 years, always in a uniform. I find that the habit now of going to work or going to with an open neck shirt on, I enjoy it,
right,
but it still seems strange to me.
You got to put your tie on every day.
Well, I don't. I've got out of the habit now, but I still have a drawer full of ties, all of which never get used anymore. Even now, going to weddings and things, I seldom wear a tie. I did one to a funeral. I did wear a tie to a funeral about a month ago, but that's the only time in the last year I think I've ever worn one or got out of uniform, as I would say.
Okay. So, but it makes that choice in the morning so much easier when you have a uniform because you don't have one.
No, you don't have to choose anything. No.
Okay. But also your preparation for what's going to happen. And I guarantee you're a man of routine. I guarantee that before you go to bed, that you've actually got it all set out and ready to go for the next day.
Yeah, pretty much.
You have to do that.
Pretty much, yes.
You have to do that because you've got a confined space in a cabin, but you have to make sure, are your shoes clean? Have you got the right trousers? Have you got the right underwear and the socks and so forth and everything? So the preparation becomes part, and it becomes quite ritualistic.
Yeah, and still is today. I can talk through my morning habits at what I do from getting up to going out. They're exactly the same every morning. And if something disrupts that routine, I'm sitting in the car thinking, I didn't do something. There's something I missed out along the way. And all the way driving somewhere, I'll be worried about what it is I missed out. And sure enough, you get to an appointment and something's not in your bag. So,
okay, but preparation is what you've learned and what you actually do. But although you say yes to that, as though it's quite normal, you've actually trained for 20 years being at sea that's what you do.
I trained myself.
That's your survival method, isn't it? It's what you actually do.
Yeah.
Do you think it sometimes does make you judgmental of other situations?
I'm always judgmental. Everything I do is judgmental because everything everybody else does is wrong, I find, or has some fault in it. So
how do you cope with that dissonance of thinking, oh, this is wrong, this is uncomfortable? It's almost like you said to me at the beginning accusingly, I don't know what we're going to talk about. It's almost as though there should be a schedule, there should be a preparation. And I deliberately don't have a schedule, don't have a preparation, because I trust you that you will take the conversation on the journey that you are comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I think in lots and lots of other ways, having routine and ritual is safe and secure, but a lot of people don't have that safeness and security. And I think if as they grow up, it actually fundamentally affects how they are, who they are, and about the way that they grow up and the things that they do. And you spent 20 years doing that. It's a long time.
Yeah, I mean, after you finish being a cadet, you get to be a qualified navigating officer. And as the ship's navigator, you don't leave port without the charts all ready. They're marked out. They make sure they're up to date with the latest corrections. You make sure the radar's working and the echo sounder's working. And everything has to be just so before you go down to the captain and say, sir, we're ready.
Does it sometimes, do you think, to other people make you irritating to be about?
I would imagine so. You need to put my wife in this chair.
Okay, because those rituals, what is it like, for example? I can imagine cooking with you, that it would have to be very, very ritualistic in terms of process and procedure.
Yes, I like cooking, but it's a job that I have to do on my own. I can't do it with other
Have
people.
other people who don't share it.
I don't mind if they come along and peel some potatoes for me or
Right.
something like that. But after that,
As long as they skivvy and do the background
they can do the
jobs.
background stuff and then get out of my kitchen. Yeah.
Okay. So that actually sets out and defines who you are as a person. I mean, it's highly, highly formative, isn't it? So let's take this journey now that you're on, and I'm with you. You're now a junior and you're very much climbing the sort of ranks. So you get through voyages down to basically South America. And what was your reaction when you first went to South America?
Strangely enough, of all the places I wanted to go in the world, South America was at the bottom of the list. To me, in the early 1960s, South America was a place full of gangsters and this, that, and the other. It was a place where you got kidnapped. It was not a place I wanted to go. Once I got there, loved it. Absolutely loved it. Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, just wonderful places. The strange part about it was that they didn't speak English. It was, as I said before, it was the days before widespread international travel, and people spoke their own language. People didn't speak foreign tongues. But I learnt rudimentary Spanish from the stevedores in Buenos Aires. And it was very basic Spanish, and some of it you wouldn't repeat to your mother. But it was, you learn.
Actually, it's quite interesting that you should almost have a romantic relationship with it, because I've been very, very fortunate in my life to have travelled a great deal. And I think South America is the most undiscovered part of the world.
It is.
I mean, I spent the very first time I went to Caracas, right? And I went to Caracas to run a program for Hilton Hotels. And I still have very, very strong memories. I also went to Brazil with an airline company to do some work there and spent some time. South America is an extraordinary place to go to.
It is.
And it's extraordinary because of the people. And it's the warmth, the culture, the traditions and the notions. And unfortunately, America for me is dominated by what happens in the States, and almost South America is ignored in that almost contextualized way that you're describing it, full of gangsters, drug dealers and God knows what else. And now with Trump, who's wreaking havoc around the world and actually just kidnapped the guy who was running the place. Right, it actually has exemplified that for people because they don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I know in the early 1980s when we had the Falklands conflict, it broke my heart to see us fighting against the Argentinians, because to me, and I'd spent quite a lot of time over a couple of years going to and from Argentina, and when I was there in Buenos Aires or Rosario up the river Paraná, we used to spend 2 or 3 weeks out there. They are the most pro-British people you could hope to meet. Buenos Aires has an English community in it. They have their own English newspaper there. They were so pro-British. Their architecture is very British.
Extraordinary.
It is. It's like a little bit of England stuck at the other end of South America.
There's also a big lump of Germans who escaped from the war right to South America.
I think they were in Paraguay rather than
lots
so
of them
Buenos
did,
Aires.
but lots of them did, though, didn't they? And there was, and there's still vestiges of that.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, the colour, the romance, the music, the dancing, the food, everything else. I mean, they're such a life experience.
Yeah.
You must. I can imagine you as this young and impressionable young man just going out and experiencing those, like, eyes wide open, thinking, "Oh my God, that is incredible." And you can't get back home and tell other people about it because they almost sit there looking at you in disbelief.
Yes, I mean, in South America, we always, as cadets with the South American Saint Line, as I said, we were supposed to act like little officers and gentlemen. And we got to Santos in Brazil, and Santos is very famous for its areas of amusement dedicated to the seafaring community, known as Hellfire Corner in Santos. Yeah. And me and another cadet were going ashore one evening, and we were supposed to go ashore in jackets and ties and that sort of thing, but we didn't. We wandered ashore dressed only in T-shirt, shorts and flip-flops, and the captain unfortunately saw us going, and we were summoned to his cabin the following morning, and we were stood in front of him, and he said to my cohort, Chris Green, his name was, he said, Green, he said, what do you mean going ashore dressed like that? And Green rather foolishly replied, he said, well, sir, it all depends where you're going. And we got our shore leave stopped in the next port for that one, but it was worth it. And I'm sure he had a little chuckle afterwards, because he'd probably done the same himself many years before. But we were not tourists visiting a country. We were people visiting countries who had really had no experience of the tourist trade coming to them. So we were going to visit Brazil and Uruguay, Argentina, as they were in the raw.
Oh, they were in the raw.
Yeah.
And so your whole filling in the bit, seeing a map of the world and understanding what was really going on, experiencing the food, the culture, the music, and also the colour and the celebration. I mean, it's an extraordinary place.
Yeah, it is.
Extraordinary place. It must have been incredibly formative for you. And actually, did it sow an element of romance in your heart of thinking, oh, going to all these places, it must all be just as exciting?
Well, it was all as exciting. I mean, after 2 years with South American Saint Line, those ships were sold off, and we were taken into the rest of the whole Union Castle group, and sailed all over the world. And they were just as exciting. They were very different, but they were just as exciting. And again, we were going to, I was going to India, but not to tourist India. This was to India as it was in the 1960s, going to the Far East, to China, to Singapore, to Malaysia, to Australia, all around Africa. Again, seeing Africa as it was when Africa was a pink bit on the atlases. It was all, when Kenya was Kenya, not Kenya, and that sort of Africa. Yeah,
I think actually it's interesting, because as you're saying that, my brain is now going through my own sort of filing cabinet of going, oh, places I've been, things I've seen, and the impression that it makes. Do we have that experience and sometimes not realise just how incredibly formative it is?
Oh, I never realised how formative it was at the time. It totally passed me by. It's only now, looking back on it, that I can analyse my own habits and my own knowledge of the world, if you like, and my own opinions about world politics, that I can see how much was formed of my time at sea. I mean, I look now with dismay, and I see various aspects of the world quarrelling with each other. That the European communities at odds with the Muslim communities, at odds with other communities, and yet if you've been there and you visited Muslim countries and Hindu countries and every other religion you can think of, and meet those people not as tourists but as people there going to work there, you realise that those people have just exactly the same hopes and fears as we do. They have the same sense of humour as we do. They like to laugh as much as we do. And yet we demonise them. And various, politics in all different countries likes to demonise other people. But we're not like that. As people, we are... we share so much.
As you're saying, as you're talking to me, it's interesting, and I don't know whether you can still do it. You sort of replay the videos in your head.
Absolutely.
You can remember all sorts of standout things that happened, places you went to. And it must be, if you play those videos to yourself in the quietness of you being on your own, you must actually remember some incredibly colourful and also raucous and sometimes celebratory, all sorts of occasions.
Yeah.
Right. Is the thing, and we're coming to a point where we're going to take a short break, but is that view of seafarers all being raucous and irresponsible, is that an unfair tag to give to them?
Yes and no. If you've spent 2 or 3 weeks on a ship ploughing your way across the Atlantic or the Pacific, you've earned an evening of being raucous when you get into port. And by golly, we did that and we enjoyed it. And this is back in the days when going to sea was fun, and you spent a lot of time in foreign ports and you had a bloody good time when you were there. But as soon as you're back on board the ship again, it's time to flip back and you get back into the routine again.
Okay. All right. So lots of celebration, lots of drinking, excessive drinking, I would imagine.
couldn't possibly comment. I've never personally, I've never been a huge drinker, but I've been at sea with a lot of people who were. Yeah.
Okay, I think if we look at it, and it always shocked me, it did shock me. So, for example, all of those people who joined the Royal Navy, not only was the Association of Rum, they were given cigarettes as well, and they got cigarettes, and virtually everybody who went to sea smoked, and they ended up going wherever they were and getting tattoos and God knows what else all over the place because it went with that sort of territory.
Yep.
But I think it makes you a man of wisdom, and that wisdom, do you think it gives you an opportunity to share that wisdom with other people?
It does if people want to listen to it. Wisdom to me is a combination of experience and knowledge. Add the two together, you get wisdom out of it. But wisdom can only be imparted, I think, to people who want to hear it. You can't be wise with people who are just not listening.
Okay. All right. On that note, because it's a very positive one, let's just take a break and then let's move to the second section about how can we actually use that wisdom because your growth has only just begun.